we truly consider as beautiful? I just want everyone in this audience to just really think about that for a second, particularly when someone brings up the notion of a beautiful person. I feel like most people would think of someone on the cover of a magazine or on a runway, someone who's more fantasy than reality. Well-dressed, thin, graceful, thin. Our contemporary human embodiment of perfection. The idea that what's beautiful is by default also good, and by what we consider beautiful is also largely unattainable to most people. So let me ask you this. In my pursuit for perfection, how was it that I found my 15-year-old self spending her spring break in a hospital bed? How was it that the food that was supposed to nourish me became my worst fear? And how was it that I stood at 5'1", weighing only 78 pounds, yes, 78 pounds, and yet the thought of gaining a single ounce made my stomach absolutely churn? Now, please don't misinterpret me. I didn't look at a magazine one day and decide that that's what I wanted to look like. In reality, it started long before that, before I could even read. I don't think there's ever been a time in my childhood where I wasn't obsessively aware of how I looked. Before I even started school, I would always be looking in the mirror and just noticing things. Things that I didn't like and things that I wanted to change. And around second grade, when I started noticing my peers more, I would look at the other girls in the class, and then I would look back at me. And that's when I decided that I wasn't pretty. The other girls were pretty, but I wasn't. And I carried this attitude with me all through elementary school. And when I changed to a new middle school, that's when it became its absolute worst. The quiet comparisons became afternoons of me coming home and crying, trying to get a relative circumference of my arms, legs, and waist by using my fingers and wrapping them around. And the thought of my fingers not touching or crossing over was my worst nightmare. Enjoying a meal with my family turned into an argument every single night over what was on the table, whether it was too many preservatives or too much sodium. Anything that I could find for that meal to be not righteous, I did to justify why I couldn't eat it. Physical activity was no longer something I did because it was fun. It was something that I did for 3 hours every single day because if I didn't, I was a failure. And dessert was no longer a well-deserved treat. It was something I dreaded every single night. And I kept these obsessive behaviors up until around 10th grade when I weighed the exact same that I did when I started 7th grade. Now, I had gotten taller, so it looked like I lost a dramatic amount of weight, but in reality, my weight plateaued, and because of this, I didn't see a problem. In my mind, if I was sick, I would have lost weight, but everyone knows that a young girl, especially as she's going from 7th to 10th grade, she should be gaining weight and developing properly, which I just wasn't doing. And in fact, I relished in how people reacted to my size. I loved it when other girls would come up to me at school and say how I looked so skinny, and older women in my family who would say to me, "Oh, Kelsey, you're so model thin. You can wear anything you want because clothes just look good on you." And to this day, I don't even know what that means. It was as though they valued my appearance, which wasn't even healthy, over my self-confidence level, which was about as low as my weight. And behind closed doors, even I could start to see that I was experiencing negative side effects. But the little voice in the back of my head, the voice of anorexia, would always have something to say to justify it as normal or even insignificant. "Oh, your hair is constantly falling out? Well, it's hair. It'll grow back, right? You're always cold, and sometimes your fingernails turn purple in room temperature settings? Well, it's better than being hot and sweaty, isn't it? These shorts were the smallest size that the store carried, and they just fell off your waist? Well, good, and that means what you're doing is working. You have dark circles in your eyes and a graying complexion? Well, it naturally contours your face and makes you look thinner, doesn't it? And despite my worsening appearance, blatant exhaustion, because believe me, even though I thought I had all this energy from exercising, I was so tired all the time, and I didn't even realize it until I was better and I had something to compare it to. My disorder had essentially taken complete control. It would push me to be perfect, but at the same time, it told me I would never be good enough. It was like that person who you think is your best friend, and you want to be your best friend, but whatever you do, they just put you down, but you don't want to leave that comfort that they somehow give you. And I didn't realize how bad it was getting. My initial goal was to eat healthier and just be a healthier person overall, but it turned into this rigid set of illogical rules that I followed as though they were some kind of divine entity over me. Most of my meals would consist of mostly steamed vegetables because they provided roughage and volume, but for minimal calories, fat, sugar, and pretty much everything. I had this rule where if I had a granola bar, I wouldn't allow myself to have dessert because that would just be too much sugar in my mind. And a really bizarre thing I had was this one egg white ratio, because I couldn't bring myself to eat 2 full eggs. The thought of consuming 2 yolks made me incredibly anxious because of the calories, the cholesterol, and the fat content. So I would take 1 full egg in the morning and separate another and just take the white and eat that. And saying this out loud now, I see how this is completely irrational, but at the time, it felt so right, and there was comfort and solace in that. And I can understand how people would think that an eating disorder is a lifestyle choice, but it's truly not. At this time, I had no control over my attitude toward food. In fact, when I was in a setting where I would have to eat food that I normally wouldn't bring myself to eat, I would get this awful tingling in the sides of my neck as soon as I put that food to my lips. It was a physiological fear response to food. I just want you to take that in. A physiological fear response to food. And yet, I had friends come up to me and say to me, I wish I had that Kelsey willpower around food. But it wasn't willpower. It was the fear that if I had that cupcake, my thoughts would tear me apart. That I would be selfish because how dare I allow myself to enjoy dessert? How dare I allow myself happiness and a simple pleasure when I wanted to stay the thin one? And a lot of people think that anorexia is the attitude of, I don't want to eat. But it's not. It's I can't eat. When I was with my friends and we were watching movies and there was junk food everywhere, I wanted to be like them and eat the food without caring while they watched the movie and had fun. But instead, I sat in the corner and didn't eat anything and just watched them not be afraid of food, which I wish that I could do. And I could talk for hours about all my thoughts and feelings at this time, but to really bring home the point of how these psychological attitudes manifest over disorder into something that's physically evident and dangerous, I actually have photos of me at this time. And before I show you them, I just want to warn you that they are shocking. And it's one of the most conflicting feelings about being someone who's recovered is looking at yourself from that time. Because when I'm talking to people who didn't know me at this point and they want to see photos, just the idea that I have to tell them that they're graphic images, that I was at one point a graphic image. So these are from around middle school, but in 10th grade, my parents wanted me to see an adolescent specialist. For reasons other than an eating disorder, they were in as much, if not more, denial than I was. They knew that I was anxious, stressed, picky with food, and exercised too much, but to them, it wasn't an eating disorder. Not their daughter. She was too good. She wouldn't do something like that. Their daughter wouldn't be anorexic. So my first appointment was just supposed to be a meet and greet where I met the doctor and they learned about me and I learned about what would be going on with the program, who might be involved in my care, and of course those lovely diagnostic blood tests that you do before you see any specialist. And let me tell you, the entire time I just did not want to be there. The morning before was this huge argument with my parents over why I wasn't going. That I wasn't going to the hospital because the hospital was for sick people and I wasn't sick. And that a school would be a better investment of my time. But then, near the end of the appointment, well, what was supposed to be the end of the appointment, my blood results came back. And it became very clear that I would not be going home that night. My kidneys were so dehydrated that they weren't functioning properly, and the doctor was surprised that I hadn't already passed out. I had excess urea in my blood, which is a waste product that the body would normally excrete when the kidneys are functioning properly. But because they weren't hydrated, I had more than I should have in my blood. And because of this, on top of my very low body mass index, my psychological attitude toward food, and my lack of development prompted me to be admitted to inpatient ward immediately. A bed just happened to open up on the eating disorders ward right before I came. Normally, I would have had to wait for a spot on this ward. And at the time, it was the worst possible scenario in my opinion, because how dare they make me stay when I wasn't sick and I didn't need this bed? So I flipped out in front of everyone there. But looking back, I realized how lucky I truly was to be able to get a bed as soon as I needed it, which doesn't happen ever, really. But the entire time I was in the ward, I was just this inconsolable, angry, frustrated, emotional mess who was extremely uncooperative with pretty much everything. And I wasn't mad at a single nurse or doctor or anyone on my care team. I was angry that my routine was gone. For the 2 weeks I spent in the hospital, anorexia was being taken away from me, and all the comfort and happiness that I thought it gave me. I went from being excessively active to being on bed rest, where the most activity I could get was walking to the bathroom and back during the day. I went from being able to measure everything that went into my mouth to having to eat what was put in front of me and being supervised while doing so to make sure that I ate every last bite. And this isn't exactly the glamorous anorexia that the media portrays, and I'm not going to pretend for a minute that it is. Being in an eating disorder ward isn't sexy, it isn't beautiful, it's an illness. The first couple days I was there, I was hooked up to an IV because I needed to be rehydrated immediately. And my heart rate was also abnormally fast, particularly from resting to standing. So I would wear a heart monitor 24/7, so the little electrode stickers and the cords and the lovely beeping sound in the back. I had blood taken almost every single morning because they needed to monitor my urea. I was weighed every single morning in just a hospital gown. And you essentially have your freedom taken away from you. In addition to being supervised for every meal, like I said, I couldn't even go to the bathroom by myself, and I had to go in specific intervals after every meal. Now, I wasn't someone who purged, but this was general protocol across the ward, because it would prevent not only purging, but it would also prevent people from doing things like jumping jacks and body checking. In fact, there wasn't even a mirror in the bathroom, and even to shower, I had to sit instead of stand. And you think I would have gotten it right at this point that I was truly sick? No. The entire time I was there, all I could think of was leaving and going back to what I knew and was comfortable, going back to anorexia. And I would be sitting in the bed at times, and I would just be grabbing my legs because I thought they were getting flabby just from sitting in the bed. And my parents, they thought they were doing what was best for me by agreeing with me and disagreeing with my care team on a daily basis, but they were really perpetuating and supporting anorexia and the thoughts that it had over me. And they just thought they were doing what was best, and I love them for that, but having them agree with what was going on in my treatment would have helped me not only adjust to the hospital life, but accept the fact that I was extremely ill. And because I didn't want to do outpatient, I didn't, and I essentially had to do most of the recovery process on my own. And I'm not going to pretend that it was easy, because it wasn't. Yes, I've gained weight and I've gained physical health, and I had amazing friends at school who would ask me, "Kelsey, have you had enough water to drink today?" And encourage me to try new foods without pushing me, which was great because it made me feel like I wasn't a freak for slowly gaining weight. But there were, of course, days when I wanted to go back and I didn't want to continue, and I wanted what anorexia gave me again. Like the day that I finally hit 100 pounds, and I looked down at the scale and started crying. But then I remembered how much better I felt, how much more confident I felt, and how I was becoming me again, and not something that a disorder dictated me into being. And it's really great because I've gained so much more than just weight. I've essentially gained life and a future to be proud of. Because the way I was going to give up my entire life and my future for this false comfort that anorexia gave me. And it's easy to see that people who are recovering from anorexia gain weight, but in truth, there is so much more than that. And it's really great that as a society we're talking about it more, but we still tend to romanticize the really nitty-gritty components that are sometimes very hard to talk about. We have this notion that recovery is almost instantaneous and purely physical, but that's not the hardest part. The hardest part is allowing yourself to let go of anorexia and its control and become you again. And looking at yourself in the mirror and seeing a different body and having that reiterated that anorexia is slowly leaving your life. And I was extremely lucky on how things turned out, because recovery is one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make, but ultimately the best. But I'm not going to deny that people do die from eating disorders like anorexia. It doesn't matter if you're a girl, a boy, a man, or a woman. People are taken from their loved ones all the time because of eating disorders like anorexia. And it's really unfortunate because a lot of people who are recovered are very ashamed to come forward because they don't want people to judge them. And I know when I was just out of the hospital, I just told people it was my kidneys. I wouldn't say to them that, hello, I'm Kelsey and I had anorexia. I lied, and it was to protect myself. But by sharing experience, I believe that it doesn't just educate people who don't know anything about eating disorders. It helps people who are struggling realize that they're not alone. Because I know when I was at my worst, just to hear someone say the things that I was feeling, to know that I wasn't alone or a freak, because that's one of the hardest things about an eating disorder, is the feeling of isolation and that you're all alone. By spreading education, we can provide a safe environment for people to come forward and get the help they need, because these are issues that are very hard to overcome on your own. Yes, I did a lot of the gaining weight on my own, but if it wasn't for that inpatient experience, I don't think I would be standing here today. And it's funny because when I was really sick, my view of success was something so superficial. The idea of perfection in every aspect, whether it be appearance, career, lifestyle. But now, I view success as being able to be happy with myself and my true self, not what a disorder tells me that I am or I'm going to be. And someone who can be honest with what happened and able to share their experience in order to help others. And I'm honored that I was able to share that experience with you today. Thank you.